Hi, everybody. Welcome to Trisha's Thoughts. My name is Patricia, and today I've got a friend of mine, Diana, all the way from Malawi. Hi, Diana.
Hey everybody.
Today,
Finally.
our topic is depression, and specifically how we deal with depression within the walls of the church. Before we start, Diana, do you mind if you can just introduce yourself? Who is Diana?
I am so many things. I'm a digital creative. I call myself an urban missionary, but I work in ministry with an organization called Young Life.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a creative, as I said. Yeah, I write. I have a podcast. I have a YouTube channel, and I do so many other things. Yeah, but those are like, if I had to summarize them, those are like the core things that I do.
So what is your YouTube channel? Where can we find you when it comes to your YouTube, your podcast?
So you
What
can
is the name
basically
of the
find
podcast?
so you can find everything that I do on my website, iamnotagoddess.com. But I have a podcast called On the Road with D, and that's where you can find more of the current stuff,
Okay.
especially during the season. That's where I've been creating primarily that, and my blog, also iamnotagoddess.com. And so my podcast is titled On the Road with D, and initially it was going to be me interviewing the interesting people I meet when I travel. And then Corona happened. And so it's been a little bit of me talking to people. It's also been me just sharing my thoughts. My recent episode is about body positivity. And then my YouTube channel is more of a lifestyle channel, like anything goes. There's sit down videos, there is vlogs, there's a little bit of everything. And then my blog is more around faith and the urban Christian, especially the urban African Christian, and everything that goes on in this, interesting mind of mine, and that I feel like sharing. Yeah.
What is depression to you?
I think the first thing would be like for me to add a disclaimer to say, obviously, I'm not a mental health expert. I think most of my knowledge around mental health and depression and anxiety comes from the experience of it. And so I would say mental health is like, depression rather is a persistent feeling of sadness. And that sadness is not just I am feeling sad. It could range from I am feeling sad and I don't know why. I am feeling sad and I can't get out of it, or I'm feeling dead inside. I am feeling, for some people, it feels like they're fighting something within themselves. And so it ranges. It's just, I would say for the most part, it is consistent sadness. I think medically they say that ranges over a consistent period of 2 weeks. So if it is like nonstop sadness for 2 weeks, and obviously that has implications such as not being able to get out of bed, not being able to go on with your life. And so according to mental health professionals, they say after that 2-week period, and if it's interrupting your life, you're encouraged to seek help. And so that's kind of my layman definition of depression.
Okay. And in terms of the walls of the church, based on your own experience, how do you think the church actually deals with this? The reason why I'm asking, I've heard it numerous times from different people, when you say, okay, fine, I'm going through this, I'm depressed, maybe I should consider counseling, for example. And automatically you get the response of, oh, no, just come, we'll pray for you. And like,
Yeah.
I've been praying, guys. It's not that I haven't been praying, I've been praying. But I just feel that I need something else.
Yeah. Man, I think it ranges from what kind of church background that you have. I think when we're talking about the church and mental health, church and depression, the mistake most people have when they're speaking about the subject is they treat the perspective that the church has as if it's it's homogenous, as if it's just one thing. But in my experience, different churches have different perspectives that all look like the same thing. So most of them, so you'd range from a lot of Pentecostal churches would fall on the side of like, let's pray this away, let us cast this demon away, and you know, that's around, you know, prayer, and more of like it is spiritual warfare, like you can kick it out with a lot of prayer and fasting. And then most Pentecostal churches, most conservative, their approach is prayer and counseling, but that is only exclusive to the pastor or spiritual leadership. Basically, so the one thing that both of these people have in common, or both of these sides, or anything in between have in common, is just the lack of trust and the lack of referring to mental health professionals and looking at faith and spirituality and prayer and the Bible as the first line of defense. And understandably so, because as Christians, that is what we believe. But at the same time, I think we've often looked at our first line of defenses as if they're contrary to seeking help in other ways, especially because, and I understand, I spent a lot of time, I've experienced the other side of not trusting basically like secular or non-Christian mental health professionals before, and that's where I can speak most from experience. But I think that on one hand it comes from misunderstanding what it is exactly mental health professionals do, but also sometimes I think and misunderstanding the heart and the intention of the person. And so basically us going to mental health professionals is not saying that our pastors or
Mm-hmm.
prayer or the power of spiritual disciplines has failed. And so I think that's the common misconception that the church has, that us, if you're looking for anywhere else for help apart from the church, that you're not trusting in God enough, when it's like actually it's quite the opposite. And then you have obviously churches that believe both. I don't wanna, I think I gave a range, and then there's churches that believe both. And like I'm currently in a church that's very supportive and very pro mental health and pro seeking help, because we realize that even as spiritual leaders, we have limitations as far as our skill sets go. And I think on one hand, as a spiritual leader myself, who not only have I dealt with depression, but also like I've helped people in situations of crisis, one of the things that recommending people to mental health professionals is it not only protects them, it protects me as well. So it puts boundaries in my life so that I'm not saying yes to things that are beyond what I can help, but it also protects the person that is in need of help, because they're getting the help they should, but they're also protected legally, ethically, because when you're going to an informal counselor, there's no contract, unless your church has one, but like most of the times, the only safe space that you trust is that I trust my pastor. But you never know, you could share something in confidence, and then next time it's being shared by the pulpit. These are things that happen, and there's nothing that, as somebody who is seeking help, you're not protected. And so there's various reasons, more than just the fact that I think primarily for me, the big reason why I'm an advocate for like even us as people in the church, we should seek mental health care elsewhere, is one, obviously, like God gave people different giftings. God has blessed us in the world with so much knowledge and wisdom, and the scientists and doctors and chemists and all these people that are there to help us and to help us when we don't have solution, but also people who have studied the human mind and how it works, but also that those people are contractually obligated to care for me, and there's certain boundaries that are there when those people are caring for you. But at the same time, sometimes you need to speak to somebody who is neutral to your life, somebody who is, because we have complicated relationships with like church leadership and people at church, because sometimes you want to talk about things that you think, oh, this is a safe space, only for you to learn that it is not. And so there's so many layers to getting mental health care. But I think think as a community, as the church, we have definitely so much learning and unlearning to do with how we view mental health. Yeah.
What advice would you give to, okay, so this is going to be two in one, right? What advice would you give to someone in
Okay.
the church in terms of how they should
Mm-hmm.
deal or support somebody who's depressed? And what advice would you then give to someone within the church who is depressed but is scared to actually label it, saying that I am depressed?
I think the first one, it's be there for them. I think that's the greatest thing you can do. This the hard part about depression and like watching those you love suffer, and even you as a person suffering, is you can't get somebody else out of it. You know, you can't. There's very little you can do to get them out, and so I'd say just making sure that they know that you're there, and asking what kind of help they need. And sometimes you're not gonna get an answer, and that's okay, you know. And if you're praying, like, you don't always have to to pray in that moment. I think private prayer is also so powerful, and
Yeah.
just being able to discern when is the right time for me to pray with this person.
Mm.
But I think just knowing that people are there and that they're not a burden, like, and not making them feel like a burden. And like, even sometimes hearing those words like, hey, you're not a burden, or, you know, you need somebody to talk to, I'm here. And continuing to educate yourself around mental health so that you're a trustworthy and safe person for somebody who is struggling with their mental health. And also acknowledging that you do not know a lot, and that is okay. I think oftentimes, even myself, I found myself in times where like I'm like, I feel so helpless to help my friend, and sometimes I feel like I don't know what the right thing is to say, and that is okay. You know, I think sometimes there's power in sitting with people when things are hard. There's power in just sitting in silence. You don't need to always have the right things to say. You don't need to always have a Bible verse. You know, um, you don't need to always like, not fake happy, but be positive, because you're with somebody who's struggling with the feeling of negative feelings. And sometimes um, just telling people to be positive feels like you're adding salt to a wound. And so there's also so much power in being able to sit with somebody who is grieving and just being like, hey, I'm here with you. And sometimes that's physically for some people, sometimes that's shooting them a text, sometimes it is lifting them up in prayer. There's literally times where I haven't been doing well, and even not even reaching out to friends, but just feeling like this feels like somebody's praying for me. You know, it feels like there's forces at work in my life that are moving and helping me out of this darkness that are beyond me. And I think I attribute that to friends who pray, and friends who pray when I'm not able to pray. And you don't even need to be telling me you're praying, you know, sometimes,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I'm feeling it. And then I think, and the second question was for somebody who is struggling with depression within
Yeah.
the church. Um, Man, I think it gets better, as cliche as that sounds. I think the first step is, I would encourage anyone, is to always reach for help. Um, find somebody who is safe. Find somebody who you trust, somebody you know that can be there for you and help you, and know, be aware of the extent to which like your depression is, or how your feeling is. um and but I'll just say, just reach out to somebody, talk to somebody around you, invite somebody in, even if it's just one person. There's just so much power in community, and so much power in confiding and reaching out to people. And I think as people, we generally need to do better in being safe spaces for each other, because you don't know what other people are struggling with. And yeah, like, it's a very heartbreaking situation to be in, but um it's possible. It's just, you know, reach out to somebody. If you have care around you, if you have access to mental health care, if you have access to a hospital you can go to, and just, you know, say, hey, I'm struggling and I need some help. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question would be, what are, according to your experience, right? What are the symptoms or the telltale signs that somebody that I know is depressed? How do I differentiate from, okay, maybe this person is just sad today and this person is actually depressed?
It's hard to just to read somebody else's emotions,
Yeah.
but I would say listening and paying attention to them in their life. Just are they picking up unhealthy habits? I think some of the habits is, are they eating too much? Are they eating too little? If they drink alcohol, are they drinking more than usual? Are they maybe spending way too much time alone and running away from company in a way that is outside of their usual self? And I think just being on the lookout for anything that seems outside of how they normally behave, and even sometimes language. I think other people are very, like, you can tell that this person doesn't sound okay, but sometimes it can be subtle as well, where there's just a lot of being alone and just like not wanting to go out and feeling like purposeless, or feeling inactive, like if they're constantly missing work, missing school, or being behind on their goals. And I think it just depends from relationship to relationship. But I think just be aware of, like, one, the signs that are the opposite. And the opposite can be, if you're an extrovert, maybe you're keeping to yourself a little bit more, or if you're an introvert, you're going out more. It looks differently to everybody, but just look out for unhealth. I would say look out for unhealth, look out for habits that seem unhealthy, especially like when we're talking to us people in the church. There's things that like aren't maybe as common that we probably even need to be aware of, especially like there's probably less people, I'm assuming, who would have a problem with like drugs and alcohol and using those things. But what about our relationship with food and sleep? Are you overdoing it? Are you overeating, under eating, oversleeping, undersleeping, missing important things? I think, yeah.
And you also mentioned that you were once depressed, right? How did you get yourself out of it?
A lot of work. I think a lot of self-work. I had reached a point where, like, I I would say, unfortunately, it took so long for me to get to a point. Like, by the time I was like, I need to get help, I was at a place where it was just not good. Like, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. But I was able to kind of see those patterns in my life and see that I need help. And I was privileged enough to be able to access mental health care. And so it took a lot of therapy and a lot of giving myself permission to go to therapy, because if you've grown up in a Christian environment where therapy is not normalized, you could have those voices inside your head just discouraging you from seeking the help that you need. So it took speaking to friends and inviting people in and just seeing those habits I was talking about earlier, seeing them in myself, also being like, hey, why am I sleeping almost all day? Why am I not working? Emotions. And so it took a lot of that, and finally taking that step to ask for help. And even then it got worse before it got better. And so I was in therapy maybe for like eight months before I started to feel better. And those, in that 8 months, I would say those first 4 to 5 months were probably the hardest and the worst I've ever struggled with depression. But it got better. And even afterwards, even now, I'm still in therapy. I actually have a therapy session tomorrow. I'm still in therapy. I'm still working on myself because there's still so much. I'm not at 100% yet. And I've had to, on top of therapy, I've had to also get on medication. And so I take antidepressants that really help me to be 100%, and or get as close to 100% as I can. And so I think it's a continual work. So I'm in therapy, I take my medications every day, but it's also other things like constantly checking in on myself and my emotions, doing that inner self work, because like people think therapy is just like the therapist is going to do all the work for you.
Yeah.
So you have to get to a point, not have to get to a point, but whenever you get to a point where you're strong enough to do work by yourself, don't get complacent. Just continue to like maintain a healthy lifestyle, like keeping your body moving, whatever that looks like, whether it be dancing or working out, taking care of yourself, being mindful of how you care for your body and your being. I think that is something that all of us should be doing, because I think mental health is something that everybody has, right? And
Yeah.
so it's the same thing with your physical health. You have to put in time and effort in taking care of it. And so I think the greatest thing I've done, apart from therapy and medication, is to give myself that those rhythms and routines where I'm actively caring for myself. I'm constantly checking in with my emotions. I'm constantly, self-caring and doing all the important things. And so I think I would encourage everybody, and not just people who struggle with depression, but everybody. Like, I think it's something that we should all have as a part of who we are,
Yeah.
to just care for our bodies, care for our minds. It's the greatest thing we have, right?
Mm. What about for somebody who might be currently depressed, right? But they are in the process of dealing with it. So they have acknowledged that they're depressed. They have started seeing the therapist, etc., etc. But it feels like it's getting worse. Like you've just mentioned, sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. They're currently in that situation. What advice would you give to that person?
Mm. I'd say keep on going. Unfortunately, it does get better before it gets worse sometimes. I think keep on going, be honest with the people that are giving you help. If you're in therapy, be honest with your therapist and say it's not helping, or I'm not where I need to be. Referring back to my own story, it was about probably a year plus into therapy when both me and my therapist realized that as much as therapy has been amazing, it's been great. It helped me get from 10% to 60%, but it's not where I needed to be, and that it's still like my brain function wasn't where I needed to be, and so I needed that extra help. And if I wasn't honest about how much I'm struggling, we weren't gonna reach that point, obviously, because it doesn't read minds, right?
Yeah.
But I would say be patient with yourself. It takes a really, really long time, and sometimes, especially for those of us who have struggled with depression all their lives. Like, I've struggled with depression, I think from as early as 10, 11 years old, and it might possibly be something that I might struggle with for the rest of my life. I don't know that, but I would say be patient, because this is like you're undoing years worth of habits and
Yeah.
patterns of thinking, and so you're always doing better than you think you are. You've got to be giving yourself a little bit more credit, and surround yourself with people who will cheer you on and remind yourself that you're better today than you were yesterday. And so keep on going. Like, don't give up. Like, it's worth fighting for. you know yeah, I think that's what I would say, without sounding cliche. I think that is what I would say.
And what are your last words to everybody watching? What would you want people to know, whether it be about depression or anything?
What would I want people to know? Man, I would say it's such a hard thing, but I think one of the things that I would want people to know is, as much as people think there's more people talking about depression now than 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
And sometimes people tend to think that if something becomes a trending topic, it's cute, or the media is pushing an agenda, and not really that this is a real thing that people go through. And so the first thing I'd say is, don't be one of those people that are dismissive about real experiences that people go through, because you think this is just popular culture pushing us, or telling us what to think and how to think. So don't be one of those people. Educate yourself. Be somebody who can be a safe place. Like, I think the goal should all aspire to is to always be somebody who can be a safe space for somebody struggling with mental health, because at some point life gets us all, at varying degrees. We all struggle with these feelings, and so we have to have safe spaces. We as people need to be safe spaces. Even now, as we think of like how we use social media, are we being safe spaces online? Are we being people who are kind? Are we being people who use our words wisely, and are people who build up and not tear down? And I think the second thing I would say is like, I think everybody should have a self-care routine. And again, like, self-care is also another trendy word, but I think in essence, it's just about you treating yourself as a divine being. And there's something that I read today that says, rest is a spiritual practice that allows us to see ourselves as divine beings, because capitalism treats us as machines. It's from this lady. Her name is Trisha something. She's the lady who does the NAP ministry. I don't know if you've seen it online.
Her name is Trisha?
Trisha. Her name is Trisha, actually.
Hey,
she has a
shout out
page
to her.
called the NAP ministry. Yeah. And I think it's something that like everybody should check out. And so her whole thing is like pushing rest, especially for Black communities, because we've got every reason to rest. And so she talks about that it is a divine reminder that we are divine beings. And I think self-care is that. It is us reminding ourselves that we were not created to keep on going. We are at some point mortals, and we need to stop, check in with ourselves, care for yourself, laugh, do something that makes you happy, dance, have a dance party alone, and especially in this COVID season, I don't know anyone whose mental health is 100%, and so we all have so many worries. And I would say, take up one thing that makes you feel good, and it doesn't have to be something that makes you spend money. You don't have to buy that milk. Writing in your journal, it could be going for a walk, it could be video games, or talking to your mom, whatever it is that actually lifts your spirit. I think we all just need to have those disciplines to just help us keep on going. And so I think that those are the few words I would I would leave with, because there's so much we could talk about mental health. But I think primarily I would say that take care of yourselves. Yeah.
Wow. I think you're right. I feel like we need a part 2 for this. But while you were talking about rest, one thing I think that we struggle to deal with rest, right? Especially with our generation of, you always have to hustle, you feel the need of proving yourself to everybody else, that, okay, I'm also doing 1, 2, 3, and I'm not left behind. The whole thing of FOMO, and then COVID happens, then lockdown happens. And with that, even though you might be within your own place and you're not moving around, is your mind really resting though? So rest is really, I think, one of the things I struggle with, but it's one of the most important things.
Yeah. And I would even take it a notch further, and I would say it is the most important thing you could do, because the world in which we're living in, and when I say the world, I know this is like probably like a Christian audience. I don't mean the world in a sense of how we mean the world. I mean just genuinely like the lands that we exist in, the systems in which we exist in, do everything possible, anything in their power to keep us from resting. So whether be it obviously capitalism and existing, us as Black women existing in a white world, in a world where there's white supremacy, and it feels like we're at war in so many different ways as Black women. We're there's just so many things that are pulling us left, right, and center. And then you go on social media and you see what your friends are doing, and you're like, man, I'm not doing enough. I gotta grind. Like, people out here getting degrees during COVID. And so we don't realize how much all of that accumulates. Even how like weekends is like, we use all our free time to do side hustles now. And as people, we don't really have time to just stop and not always be on the move. And I think rest is very revolutionary, and we need to take more time. Like I think going back even to the command of God, like observe the Sabbath. On the seventh day you shall rest. And that idea of, I need a day to acknowledge I am a person. And I might like be sidetracking a little, but there's a podcast I listen to called The Bible Project, and one of the times Sabbath, and one guy was saying when he was in Jerusalem studying the Bible and getting his PhD or whatever, one of the things he found interesting about how Jewish people observe the Sabbath is how they actually don't buy anything. So they don't actually trade, like everything, they don't buy, they don't cook, they don't whatever, because it's also them taking a break from participating in capitalism, which I was just like, man, that is so powerful, you know. And like, I don't think there's a way to purely do it, because it's like we are participants whether we like it or not. But I think there's so much in that principle of just having a day where you acknowledge that your food comes from somewhere else, that your source of life and your source of being is somewhere else, that you're mere mortal and you're a human being, and not rest just as a tool to recharge to be more productive, but as a tool to connect with yourself and to connect with God. But anyway, let me stop now, because I can talk about rest forever.
Thank you so much for taking your time to have this conversation with us. I would like you to just repeat one more time where people can find you on your podcast, your YouTube, your social media, your website. And are you still selling your t-shirts?
Ooh, not right now, but maybe sometime in the future. I don't know. I'm trying to do less things now. I will not say sometime in the future. So grind culture is not having me. I'll tell you that. And so I'm trying to do very few things. And so right now, the few things I'm doing is I'm writing a lot. I might or might not be writing a book, but I've been writing a book ever since you've known me. So I'm writing a lot. And so the most important thing I can promote is my writing, because I think of a list of all the creative things I do, it is the thing that is most important to me. So please check out my writing on iamnotagoddess.com. And you also find my podcast and my YouTube channel, everything there. So my podcast is called On the Road with D. So that's On the Road and D as D-double-E. And then I Am Not a Goddess on YouTube. But everything, if you find at I Am Not a Goddess, you probably find my links to everything else on there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for watching. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks.